Welcome back to the Storypunks podcast, the show where we talk about all the punks, so steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. Today we're talking about Decopunk. It's part 2 of my interview with Bethany C. Morrow. If you have not checked out her book, Mem, you must do so immediately. And I've already introduced it in episode 53, so if you missed that, please go back and check that out before continuing with this episode, which is episode 54. And I also want to mention she has a YA novel coming out. You can already add it on Goodreads and get connected to it ahead of time. The title is A Song Below Water. And I just want to read a little piece of the description. It says, A Song Below Water is an hashtag own voices YA contemporary fantasy told alternately by two magical black girls living in the hashtag say her name era, when being known sometimes comes at a great cost. And you can find out more description by just visiting BethanyCMorrow.com. You'll see A Song Below Water. Just click on that. And also check out Take the Mic, which is an anthology Bethany is featured in. And this is a young adult anthology featuring fictional stories of everyday resistance, which is so cool. And I think you should definitely check that out. Let me just mention really quickly that the tip jar is open for the Storypunks podcast. If you get value out of this show and you could offer a couple dollars a month or whatever feels right to you, I would love if you could head over to patreon.com/storypunks. And if you're new to Patreon, it's spelled Patreon. This is a site where you can help different creators and help them grow toward different goals. So be sure to check out the goals that I've set up for this show. One of those goals goes hand in hand with the open call that I have right now through July 2019, where anyone can apply to be a guest on the Storypunks podcast. And there are a limited number of slots. I'll even say there's a very limited number of slots for next season, which is next year. But one of my goals on Patreon is to make the show a year-round show. And that would be so awesome. It would just mean more inspiration. It would mean more work for me. So that's really why I have to have that support level before I can do that. But I don't mean that in any kind of pressured way. Either way, the show will grow and either scenario works for me, but I just know my limitations. So because so many people expressed that they would really like the show to be weekly and year-round, when I issued that survey a few weeks ago, I had to put something together to kind of like meet the demands of reality, but also put it out there and hopefully create a space where I could do that. Because I agree, I would absolutely love to do this show every week for the whole year. So if you head over to patreon.com/storypunks, you can see everything I'm talking about there. And if you're interested in beta reading my work, you'll also see a tier for that. So that's how Patreon works. You can choose different tiers. And by the way, if you join any of these things, leaving a tip in the tip jar every month or joining as a beta reader or any other tier that might be there once you listen to this, that's where you unlock the patron-only content that I'll be producing over there. So that is how Storypunks can grow and reach its fullest potential and hopefully continue to be a source of inspiration with everything you're working on. I hope you'll check it out. And without further ado, let's get right back into part 2 of this fabulous Decopunk discussion with author Bethany C. Morrow. I'm so excited. Do you have anything to share with other creators as far as research? And I know it's very subjective to each work, but any takeaways that might help people?
Oh gosh. A lot of times, even just when people ask me to find random things, a lot of times I am given a lot of credit for just knowing how to internet well. And I don't have any way to quantify that or figure out why that is other than just being creative with search terms. But they're definitely the end result of this could not begin to demonstrate how long or how difficult it was to find specifics, because it's very easy to find a couple of really well-known stories. It's a lot more difficult to verify aspects of those that have
Yeah.
become lore, and B, it's very difficult to find, especially if you don't know where to look, to find what it would have really been like for the average person living in a particular place at any given time. So I really, once I found the Art Deco Society of Quebec and the Quebec Family History Society and things like that, that was really helpful because at first I'm just looking at historical sort of thumbnails that whether you're going through the archives or a website that has to do with the newspapers that were around at the time or anything like that, they'll have little snippets. And the Quebec Family History Society is actually how I found out after, gosh, what felt like months of hitting a brick wall, trying to find details about the first fatality in the which happens in the book as well. Um, Suddenly I was able, because it was the Family History Society, to find not just his name. And I don't know if you know this about Quebec, but you can't take your husband's last name. So
I did not know that.
so women have, which is really funny, and it's like such a boon for feminism because it just means that women keep their father's last name. They don't seem to get the irony of that, but that's fine. I won't even go
Oh,
into the trouble that I've had with people trying to forcibly use my maiden name.
wow.
Because choice doesn't
Mind
matter.
blowing.
They're like forcing you to do the right thing.
Sure.
Anyway, so it's very easy to not be able to tell for those of us who are American and doing research. It's very easy to lose track of, okay, who is related to who and how, unless it's really a patrilineal family tree. So figuring out who was the wife to the person who was actually killed and the children will typically have the father's last name, but not being able to tell who, if there was a woman there, if there was a wife there, what the connection was, all of that kind of stuff. Thankfully, the Quebec Family History Society had it put together in a way that was very obviously marié, and so this was his wife was present when he was struck and killed. Um, then I used, McGill is right there, so you've got McCord Museum and different. You've got a lot of the different archives and digital archives, which was a huge boon. Um, it's a lot of. It's genuinely, I guess you've got to really be interested. You've got to really, really be interested in finding something that really feels organic versus just going with what's on the top layer. Because I found that a lot of that stuff is very much like it is nowadays. It's not necessarily accurate, and it was just a good story, and people liked it and they passed it along. One of the most interesting things, I always tell this story because it was so heartbreaking, and I did not use it, but there was at some point I realized I was just sort of looking at accidents and just awful freak accidents. And the one that is in the book is the oh comment dire is the St. Patrick's Day.
Um,
It's the St. Patrick's Day accident, the northbound train uh, at Gare Windsor, which is so beautiful. It is now a mall, but but so the people who were killed in because the train went through the woman's sitting room and then into the concourse. So basically, the people who were killed were women and children. Um, and there's a child who died there, and I really was like, I might be going crazy, but I feel like I've seen this name before. So then I go back to start. Now I'm going backwards, trying to look through all of the stuff that I had put aside to say, this is really interesting. I might have to use this. And I finally found this little girl 2 years prior to this accident. She was in Hochelaga, which is kind of like it's a neighborhood in the north. And of Montreal, and there was a school fire, and these teachers were basically trying to lower children out of a second story window. I want to say 27 children died and one teacher, and this little girl had survived the Hochelaga school fire only to be killed in a completely I mean, to me, more fantastically freak accident.
Yeah.
I just could, and then I'm just thinking about the parents. I believe her mother perished with her actually in the train station, but just, especially just as a writer, you just start thinking about what is the mother or the father's experience here of your child, of this completely devastating event where so many people lose children and you're so blessed not to, and 2 years later to lose her in such an awful, horrific fashion. It was just, I don't know if that helps anybody in terms of like research, but it is one of those things that happens when you really go into research and you're really in that headspace where these things just, it sort of took over my life for a bit, because when you get to the real stuff and you get to people's testimonials and details and all of that kind of stuff and little histories, it's just, it's so amazing. It's so amazing to read, and to put, and when you're piecing it together, there's a lot of investigative, there's an investigative aspect to it, because you have to sort of be able to put these things together, and put the pieces together, because very few sources have complete stories. And usually you're really, really lucky if you get a last name and an age or something like that, because that's how I figured out. There were a couple of times like that where there would be people that were involved in multiple of these, and it just reminds you how small, honestly, Montreal really is. Which I know because you'll just go out and you'll run into somebody, I will run into somebody I go to church with, and I'm like, is this city that small? I don't feel like I should be running into people just on the street.
Totally.
But it's very satisfying when you start hitting on these stories and putting it together. It's definitely worth it, but you usually do have to go through a pretty bleak period where nothing seems easy to find, and you're just getting absolutely nothing for your for your trouble, and you're like, should I just make all of this up? Should I just skip this completely? But I think for world building, you have to have the fortitude to recognize that even for fiction, you're going to need a certain amount of truth to really ground your reader. It's something that you need to invest in, even though I totally understand that it is difficult.
Oh, completely. Well, if nothing else, it just really conveys the enthusiasm that can come, like you said,
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
getting through the boggy moments of research. Not moments, extended periods of time of research.
Extended periods of time. Yeah. The pleasures are the moments.
Yes, exactly.
The ongoing is the please let me find something.
Absolutely. But it also came through that if you are willing to immerse yourself in that, and
Yeah.
maybe there are creators out there who just haven't gone there. They haven't
You
really
have to
jumped
go.
off the deep end.
You have to really go further.
There
You
are
get to the
treasures
point where
there.
like, I don't want to do this anymore. Just keep going.
Yes.
Yes.
What is your overall workflow like at this stage in your career? And it may change with every work that you do.
Oh, yes. Okay, so let me see if I understand. Do you mean in terms of when I'm drafting? Do you mean in terms of how I come to choose a project? Let's say after I'm going right into, or I have gone directly into a new project from the project that I just finished and turned in, which is hopefully the book 2 to my 2020 release, which means we're several years in the future right now. But one thing is, of course, you do now have contracts and they have a certain number of books, and so you pretty much owe people work, and that needs to be priority. Um, what I what I had was 3 first chapters, because that's one of my earliest things that I do. Is I have a concept. I need to have a character. I usually need to have a first line or something, and then I sort of need to, knowing usually what the climax or the resolution is, I need to start writing and see what organic tension is there. And so I had done that after I finished working on A Song Below Water, and I had something that could be the follow-up to that, and then I had 2 completely unrelated things. One was hard science fiction, and then the other one was the thing that I'm actually working on right now, which is the social horror. And after writing the first chapters, I will say that I would then try to write a synopsis, as many pages as I could get. So 2 to 6 pages where I'm telling myself the story, and just seeing if it's actually strong enough. I didn't used to do this. Honestly, I've had to, with a reduced bandwidth, mental bandwidth, I've had to get into the habit of doing this so that when I go to write, I can draft as quickly as I want to. Because before I was ever agented, I was drafting in about 6 to 8 weeks. And I don't like for it to go past that. Just because the intensity and staying in that world, like I said, staying in the world is extremely important to me. And having a really, really strong sense of what that world is really important to me. So I went back and I looked at the first, well, actually, I think I sent my agent the first chapters as well. And the one I'm working on right now actually was not the strongest of them. It was just the most, I think, exciting in terms of possibilities, because the hard science fiction, it's like, this is what's going to happen. It's a really tight story. I'm in love with it. I can't wait to write it. But this one, I think, is a bit more timely. You do have to make decisions now based on a lot of other factors other than what you might have done before, which is just, okay, which one is the clearest image in my mind? Now there are logistically things to consider based on your contracts and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew this was going to be harder to draft because I didn't have as clear of a picture, but if I could find it, it was going to really be something important. So I'm at 15,000 words right now. Thankfully, the other difference is I don't have to do an entire, draft before I show it to my agent or editor.
Oh, yeah.
That makes a huge difference to just say, okay, 20,000 is now like, okay, I need to have 20,000 maybe. And then I can get some feedback. And that's really, really helpful. It definitely takes the edge off if you could just get there. Yeah, so I would say that in the last year, my process has completely changed, because you have all the time in the world before, and you don't anymore. I like it this way, but it definitely has changed, and it's changed substantially enough that when I'm evangelizing to people about writing a first chapter and a synopsis, I do make sure to say, I have no idea how long I will do this for. This could change completely tomorrow. This is just what's getting the work done today. So if you don't do that and I try to twist your arm into doing it, just understand that I'm a complete hypocrite, and there's absolutely no guarantee that this will actually be the way that I work from now on either.
Well, I think every creator has gone through about 100 permutations of what works.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and every time you're there, it's like, this is it. And everybody should do this. And I don't know why you're not doing this, everybody. And then 6 months later, they're like, oh, so did you? Oh, no, I don't do that anymore.
Who told you that? Not this.
Like, where did you get that from?
That's right. Do you have any pet peeves as far as when you read stuff and you're just like, okay, creators, stop doing it this way? Do you have anything like that?
Yes, of course I do. If I can hear the engine running, I'm not going to finish that book. So if something happens because the author needs it to happen, I'm done. That's not an enjoyable. And that's why, if somebody's ever like, hey, I started liking your book and then I didn't like it, so I didn't finish it. I'm like, respect. Okay, I get it. I mean, you don't owe me anything. So, and I certainly feel the same way when I'm reading. Reading is like a very sacred enjoyment for me, and I can only enjoy it one way. And so if I'm not completely immersed in the belief that this person and place are real, then I'm just not interested anymore. And so I don't know if I have any specific things, but if I can hear the engine running, I'm done.
I love that phrase. I know that's going to stick with me because it's a great way to say what we already know as creators, but
yeah.
Great reminder, great visual. So, okay, now for my final question.
Okay.
Thinking big picture, when we talk about any of these punks, could be steampunk, decopunk, whatever punks you want to speak to, but what do you see for the big picture, or what can you speak to when it comes to just that, the greater movements, whether now or in the future, whatever you want to speak to?
I will speak to my concern as somebody who's always been attracted to steampunk and has always aesthetically, especially been very, very, very attracted to steampunk. One of the sad realities as a Black woman that you constantly face is not being invited into fandom. And particularly when it's something like a punk genre, because the whole conceit is this sort of anti establishment and anti-oppressive and all that kind of stuff. And what you find is that people I haven't usually actually interrogated themselves well enough to really be doing that. So what they're doing in this space that's supposedly about revolution and the marginalized really finding their power and striking back, is they typically replicate colonial viewpoints and behaviors and that sort of thing, and appropriative behaviors. And so it makes it where a place that, for myself, especially in reading and entertainment and stuff, feeling like this is my place. Like, this is, of course I would want to be here, and of course I would belong here. Finding that, unfortunately, it doesn't actually feel that way. And I've spoke to you before about my editor at Tor, Diana Foe, and she is a very prominent voice and figure in the steampunk community. I don't know if she is as much anymore, but a lot of scholarship, a lot of panels, a lot of just involvement, and of course, bringing a lot of attention to exactly what it is I'm trying to describe here, as a woman of color, as a queer woman of color herself. And I don't know that we will always have the energy to fight for what we shouldn't have to fight for. So I think these spaces run the risk, if not already, of just being little homogenous, very sort of ironic interests, that don't actually look much different than what they're supposed to be railing against. So that's always my concern, and it's unfortunate that it doesn't seem to be taken horribly seriously by people it doesn't directly impact. So I sort of just went away from it. The book that was supposed to come out in 2016 was a steampunk duology, and when I pulled that book, it was for completely different reasons. But I've not, obviously, it hasn't been released. It's sort of, I don't see any reason to give something somewhere that I don't feel like I was welcomed. It's unfortunate, but I hope that there's going to be a switch flipped. And I hope it's not going to be on the back of people who really are running out of spoons and really running out of energy for this sort of thing. I hope that it gets to the point that people don't feel comfortable if they look around a room and they only see themselves. That's pretty much my hope, at some point, that people are going to stop being so comfortable with that.
Yeah, and honestly, we can do better. Like, I think a lot of times we hear things like you just articulated so well, and we think, oh, yep, those people are doing it. We all need to step deeper,
Right.
Go further.
Yeah.
Further. And I think that your story about the women's names in Montreal is kind of like an example, not just for women, but for any group like this, where they took one step, but then there's so much left there. There's so
much left, because you literally legally cannot change. My girlfriend got married last June, and your choices are to go into Ontario to get your name changed if you want to take your husband's name. It's just a matter of like, we're doing this because this is the right thing to do, and we're doing it in your name regardless what you say and regardless what you want, and we're not even giving you the option to opt out. And it's like, do you see how this sort of doesn't feel feminist to me? Like, do you see how I kind of don't appreciate that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think the biggest thing, like you said, when people say, oh, there's somebody else, because there's always, there's the good people and the bad people, and it's the bad people who are doing this. And that's why, for me, the bar is way, way different. Do you feel comfortable if you go into a fan space and everybody looks like you, why are you okay with that? Why do you feel comfortable with that? Because that will never not mean violence. It means somebody is being actively excluded. So instead of being like, well, I've never said that people aren't welcome, but you feel fine in places where they're not welcome, that's probably the point of entry for people. That's probably the place to start and think, okay, wait a minute, I am actually perpetuating, I am actively a part of why these spaces don't feel safe and welcoming to other people.
Oh my goodness, so articulate. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing every bit of this interview. But for me personally, especially this last bit, it's always the most important part of an interview for me. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Cindy.
Absolutely. I'm very sincerely in love with your book. And
thank you so much. That really means a lot. I really just love meeting readers and talking about this book. It has not stopped being just an amazing part of it. I know there were a lot of authors who are like, I just want to write and I don't want to have to go anywhere and I don't want to have to. I couldn't do without the other side of it, because a lot of times when people tell me what my book is about in a way that's the beauty of creation, is I can't tell you everything the book is about. Now, can people tell you stuff and you're like, no, absolutely not? Sure. But a lot of times, more times than I think people would realize, somebody will tell you something and put the pieces together for you. And there was honestly space for that in the book. And they are not, they're not just dumping a bunch of stuff in there. And that's always enlightening to me. That's amazing to me that that's possible, that that's a collaborative sort of product then at that point. I just absolutely love that. So thank you for reading it, and thank you for inviting me.
Definitely my pleasure, Bethany. Thank you. Oh my goodness, such a treat to have a Decopunk author, and especially such an amazing one. I absolutely suggest that you go check out the audiobook of Mem in particular, and you can always find my running list of recommended audiobooks at storypunks.world/audible. And the other thing I need to mention is, yes, I did forget to ask her for her handles or her, promotional sites and everything. So definitely go check out her author site at BethanyCMorrow.com, BethanyCMorrow.com. And you can also find her on Twitter at BCMorrow, and also check her out on Facebook. So she is in many other places as well, but that will help you find her and everything she's working on. Please just remember that I have opened the call for next year's interviews through the end of July 2019. So if you are interested, please reach out. Just go to storypunks.world/apply. If it feels like this is kind of a narrow window, we're already halfway through July and the open call runs through July, just please know that I opened it up to my newsletter community first. And so they had more time and filled up a lot of the slots, but there are still slots open, and I hope that you'll consider being connected through the newsletter. If you want to know about opportunities like that in the future, you just go to storypunks.world/newsletter. So I think that pretty much covers it. I'm really excited to get back to my creative projects. That's what these interviews mean to me. They mean being inspired and, finding leverage for all the things that I'm fighting against, working toward, etc. I hope it's the same for you, and I'm just sending you good vibes for your fight and for the different things you're trying to produce. And I know things can get pretty real, so just know that someone's rooting for you over here, and I really look forward to sharing next week's episodes. They're going to be awesome. So until then, I'm wishing you a wonderful week.